Ma'am, let me save you some embarrassing hours. The administrative assistant interviews were last week. And the cleaning lady's entrance for people with your black skin is on the south side, around back.
Thatcher Vance smirked, tilting his chin up as a cold. Country club laughter exploded across the multi-million-dollar marble lobby. He stood tall in his tailored suit, looking down at the black woman in the plain gray coat sitting quietly on the leather bench, clutching a worn portfolio. He didn't care that his brutal words pierced through the room like a blade. He didn't care that she had been waiting there for 3 straight hours. He crouched down, cornering her, his voice dropping into a poisonous sharp hiss.
Let's be honest about where you are in your journey. You don't belong in a platinum-level room with real money. You never will. Go back to the loading dock before I call security to drag you out of here.
The receptionist giggled. The junior associates mocked, but the woman in the gray coat didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply stared back at him with a chilling, calm stillness, letting this arrogant predator show his entire ugly system, because Thatcher Vance had no idea that the black woman he just ordered to the trash corridor was Dr. Tain's, Octavia Sterling. He had no idea she controlled $40 billion, and in exactly 40 seconds, she would pull out a single piece of paper, strip away $1.2 billion, and completely destroy his entire life. Man! He picked the absolute wrong woman to underestimate. Welcome back to Black Stories, where systemic arrogance meets absolute corporate execution. If you are tired of modern gatekeepers hiding behind their clean words while shutting the door on brilliant people, you are in the right place. On this channel, we break down the raw, unfiltered truths of power reversal, heavy justice, and the exact moments the elite find out what happens when they mess with the wrong pedigree. Let's get into how this billion-dollar trap was snapped shut. But before we get to the 40 seconds that ended Thatcher Vance, you need to understand where this happened, and why not one single person in that marble lobby tried to stop it. Harrington Stowe Capital, 280 Park Avenue, floors 31 through 40 of a tower that has been quietly running the money of the American aristocracy since 1911. This is not a firm you've heard of. That is the entire point. The firms you've heard of advertise. The firms you've heard of want your attention. Harrington Stowe does not want your attention. Harrington Stowe wants your great-grandfather's name to already be in their ledgers before you ever walk through the door. The lobby on the 38th floor is carved from a single quarry of Italian marble, the kind of stone that costs more per square foot than most people earn in a year. The walls are lined with oil portraits, in heavy gold frames. Augustus Harrington, founder, dead since 1949, staring down with the flat confidence of a man who was never once in his life made to wait for anything. Beside him, Cornelius Stowe, co-founder. A railroad fortune turned into a banking fortune, turned into the kind of generational wealth that has forgotten it was ever earned at all, and carved in Latin above the reception desk. The firm's motto, Fortuna favet dignis. Fortune favors the worthy. They love that word at Harrington Stowe. Worthy. They use it the way other people use the weather. Casually. Constantly. As if it means nothing. The right schools. The right families. The right names on the right buildings. A worthy client. A worthy hire. A man of the right pedigree. It is a beautiful word, worthy. And they have spent 114 years deciding exactly who gets to wear it. Now let me be clear about something, because it matters. Harrington Stowe was not a failing firm run by fools. That is what made it dangerous. $40 billion under management. A client list that read like a history book. Partners with degrees from Wharton and Harvard. And the kind of family trust that meant none of them had ever truly needed the job in the first place. They were excellent at what they did. Their returns were real. Their reputation was earned. That part was not a lie. But underneath the marble, and the Latin, and the oil paintings, there was a second set of rules. Rules nobody printed. Rules nobody emailed. Rules you only learned by watching who got the warm handshake and who got pointed toward the service entrance. In 114 years, Harrington Stowe had never once had a black managing partner. Never a black name partner. Never a black senior portfolio manager. Never a black face in a single one of those gold frames on the wall. They had a black woman named Lorraine Davis, who had worked their front desk for 31 years, and who was still called by half the partners the girl at reception. She was 63 years old. If you wanted to understand the second set of rules, you didn't read a handbook. You watched the elevators. There were two banks of them. The main bank, glass and brass, opened into the marble lobby with the portraits and the Latin. The other bank, plain gray steel, ran down the south side of the tower to the loading dock and the service corridors. The freight elevators, where the catering came up and the trash went down, and the cleaning crews came and went on the night shift. Through the door, around, back. In 114 years, the people who rode the brass elevators and the people who rode the steel ones had almost never been the same color. And everyone in that building had learned, without one word ever being spoken out loud about it, exactly which elevator they were expected to take. Nobody wrote it down. Nobody ever had to. That is the thing about the second set of rules. They are never on paper. Because paper can be subpoenaed, and a habit cannot. A habit just lives in the muscle of a place, passed quietly from one generation of partners to the next, until everyone mistakes it for the natural order of the world. That was the house. Marble on the outside, a locked steel door on the inside. And every person who worked there had learned without ever being told, who belonged in the building and who was trespassing in it. On this particular cold Tuesday morning, the most important visitor in the firm's entire history was about to walk through the glass doors, and not one of them was going to recognize her. Now, let me tell you about Thatcher Vance. Because if you think this is a story about a loud, ignorant bigot who didn't know any better, you have the wrong man. The loud ones are easy. The loud ones get caught early. Thatcher Vance was 52 years old, and for 19 years, he had been the most careful man on that floor. He was a managing partner, the man whose handshake could move $100 million before lunch, and in 19 years, he had never once said the ugly thing out loud. Not in an email, not in a voicemail, not in a single text message a lawyer could ever grab. He had watched lesser men torch entire careers with one drunk sentence at a holiday party. And he had filed every one of those funerals away as a personal lesson. Thatcher Vance never needed the ugly words. He had better tools, and his tools were clean. He had the word fit. He had the word pedigree. He had the word culture. when a brilliant young analyst named Deshawn applied to his desk with a perfect grade point average from Howard and 2 internships at the Federal Reserve. Vance passed him over and hired a C student named Brooks, whose father sat on a museum board. When the other partners asked why, Vance leaned back in his chair and said, "He just wasn't a culture fit. You know how it is. Some people, you can just tell, they'd be more comfortable somewhere else." He never said the word black. He said somewhere else. When a black couple came in to discuss a 9-figure inheritance, Vance, personally and warmly, walked them toward the firm's emerging clients group, the starter desk, the junior team, just to make sure you're set up with the right level of support as you grow. He told them, his hand on the husband's shoulder, like an old friend. He never said they didn't belong in the room with the real money. He just quietly made certain they never sat in it. There was a story the junior staff told about him in low voices by the coffee machine. A few years back, a black analyst on his desk, sharp, hungry, twice as prepared as anyone in the room, closed a complicated deal that made the firm $9 million. At the next partners' dinner, Vance stood up, raised his glass, and gave the credit, warmly and at length, to the white associate who had sat silently in the corner of 2 of those meetings. When the black analyst's name finally came up, Vance smiled and called him a great team player who was really coming along. Not brilliant, not the closer, coming along. The analyst left the firm within the year. Vance told everyone he was a loss, but probably happier, somewhere with a different pace, somewhere else, always somewhere else. He had a whole vocabulary, and it was spotless. Are they sophisticated investors? Do they have the right profile? Is this really our kind of client? Let's just be honest about where they are in their journey. You could put every word the man had ever said in front of a judge, and the judge would shrug. There was never anything to grab. That was the entire design of him, and here is the part that should make your skin crawl. Thatcher Vance genuinely believed he was one of the good ones. He gave to charity. He had marched somewhere back in the 90s. He had a framed photograph of himself, shaking hands with a black senator hanging in his office. He would have told you to your face, with complete and total sincerity, that he did not have a racist bone in his body. He just had standards. He just believed in excellence. He just knew. The same way he knew which fork to use at dinner. Who belonged in his marble lobby and who needed to be redirected. Gently. Toward the door. So remember that. Remember the man who, for 19 years, it was far too smart to ever say the quiet part out loud. Because what happened on that Tuesday morning, in front of a dozen witnesses, was not the careful man. It was the man underneath the careful one. The arrogance got so big. The certainty that she was. Nobody got so total that for the first time in 19 years, the mask came all the way off in public. And every clean rule he had ever lived by burned to the ground in a single sentence about a cleaning lady's entrance. And 6 months before that morning, Thatcher Vance had been handed the most important assignment of his entire career. The firm was launching a new flagship fund, the Harrington Stowe Global Opportunities Fund, $3 billion in target capital, the kind of launch that makes a man a senior partner, gets his portrait commissioned, gets his name carved into the marble right next to the dead founders he worshipped. But a fund that size does not open on hope. It opens on a cornerstone. One single, enormous anchor investor whose commitment tells the entire market that the water is safe to step into. Without that anchor, the whole thing collapses before it ever begins. The co-investors walk. The press writes the obituary. The launch becomes the single most expensive humiliation in the history of the firm, and the anchor that Harrington Stowe had spent 6 months, and a frankly obscene amount of money, chasing, the one signature the entire fund depended on to survive, belonged to a fund called Sterling Meridian Capital, run by a woman that Thatcher Vance, in all that time, had never once bothered to look up. Here is what Thatcher Vance never knew about Octavia Sterling. Here is what nobody in that marble lobby knew. She was born in Brownsville, Brooklyn, in a 3rd floor, walk-up with a radiator that banged all winter and gave no heat. Her mother's name was Eunice Sterling, and Eunice cleaned office towers on the night shift. Park Avenue towers. Glass towers. The exact same kind of tower her daughter was sitting inside of right now. Except that Eunice entered through the south side. Around back. Where the service entrance was. Because that is where the world told women like Eunice to enter. Octavia would walk those buildings with her mother sometimes. Late. When there was no one at home to watch her. She would sit in the empty marble lobbies past midnight, while Eunice ran the floor buffer in slow, patient arcs across the stone. And the little girl would do her math homework under the lights, the rich firms left burning all night long for no one. She was 9 years old, sitting in a lobby that cost more than her entire block, learning algebra out of a workbook with the cover torn clean off. While her mother mopped the floor 20 feet away, Eunice used to tell her one thing, over and over, in that low and steady voice. Babe, they're going to look at you and decide they already know the whole story. Let them. You just keep your numbers right. Numbers don't lie. And they do not care who is holding the pencil. Numbers do not care who is holding the pencil. Octavia carried that one sentence her entire life. She taught herself everything. The library was free, and so she lived in it. She read every book on markets and money the Brownsville branch owned, and when she ran out, she rode the train to the main branch downtown and read all of theirs. She got into a state school on a scholarship, worked the overnight shift stocking shelves at a grocery store to pay for her books, and she graduated at the very top of a finance program where she was the only black woman in the entire room, a feeling that would follow her, room after room after room, for the next 25 years of her life. She got a job at a trading desk where they called her a diversity hire to her face. And the cleaning lady's kid behind her back, once they found out where she came from, she did not argue. She did not cry. She just kept her numbers right. While they golfed, she built models. While they networked, she read. She found patterns in the markets that the senior men were too lazy and too comfortable to ever see. And she made that firm a fortune. And they handed the credit for it to a man named Chip So, at 31 years old, with $11,000 to her name, and a model she had built entirely on her own time. Octavia Sterling walked out the door and started her own fund. Sterling Meridian Capital. 2 desks in a sublet in Jersey City. Everyone told her it would fail. A black woman raising her own capital They did not say it could not be done. They just smiled. The exact way Thatcher Vance smiled, and pointed her, warmly, toward the door. 13 years later, Sterling Meridian Capital managed $40 billion. Octavia Sterling held a doctorate in financial mathematics she had earned at night while running the firm by day. She had been on the cover of every magazine she had once read for free in the Brownsville Library. She had quietly become one of the most powerful allocators of capital in the entire country. The kind of investor whose decision to back you could make your fund overnight and whose decision to walk away could end it just as fast. And she had never, not once, not for a single day, I've forgotten the sound of a floor buffer running across cold marble at 1 o'clock in the morning. Now, about that Tuesday, Harrington Stowe wanted her cornerstone commitment, $1.2 billion. They had courted her for 6 months. Flowers, dinners, a private box at an opera she never attended, 3 formal proposals on heavy cream-colored paper. Gerald Stowe himself, the last living heir of the founding family, the chairman of the entire firm, had telephoned her personally and told her, in that warm old money baritone, that it would be an honor and a privilege to have Sterling Meridian as the anchor of their flagship fund. The deal was ready. The terms were strong. On paper, she was going to sign. But Octavia Sterling never signed anything based on paper. She had a rule she had made the very day she walked out of that trading desk where they called her the cleaning lady's kid. Before she gave any firm her money, she went to see who they truly were. Not the partners in the conference room with the catered lunch and the rehearsed pitch. The firm itself, the way it treated the people who could do absolutely nothing for it, the way it treated the woman at the front desk, the way it treated a complete stranger in a plain gray coat who, as far as anyone could tell, was nobody worth a second glance at all. You learn everything about a place, she liked to say, by walking into it as the last person they would ever bother to impress. So on that cold Tuesday morning, Dr. Octavia Sterling, the most important visitor in the firm's history, the woman whose signature would either save Harrington Stowe or sink it to the bottom, left her car service 2 full blocks away. She put on a plain gray wool coat, the kind you buy on sale. No jewelry, no entourage, no assistant clearing her path. She tucked her worn leather portfolio under her arm, the same portfolio she had carried for 20 years, the one with her mother's laminated night shift cleaning badge still tucked into the inner pocket. Faded now and soft at the corners, and she walked into the lobby of Harrington Stowe Capital, completely alone, to find out exactly who they were. They were about to show her everything. The glass doors opened with a soft hush, and Octavia Sterling stepped onto the most expensive floor on Park Avenue. The receptionist looked up. Her name was Madison Earle, 26 years old, 3 years out of a small private college, hired in part because her aunt knew a partner's wife. Madison had a particular skill, the kind that is never written on a resume, but gets people like Madison hired at places like Harrington Stowe. She could price a human being in under 2 seconds. The watch, the shoes, the coat, the bag. She ran the numbers on the woman walking toward her. The off-the-rack coat, the unbranded portfolio, the plain flat shoes, no diamonds, no logo, no minder, and her face arranged itself into the specific, frost-edged politeness, the firm reserved for people who did not matter. "Can I help you?" Madison said. Not good morning. Not welcome to Harrington Stowe. Can I help you? Two small words doing the work of a closed door. Good morning, Octavia said. Warm and easy. I have a 10 o'clock with Gerald Stowe. Something flickered across Madison's face. Amusement. Mostly. The chairman did not take 10 o'clock meetings with women in gray sailcoats. The chairman took 10 o'clock meetings with sovereign wealth funds and sitting senators. And your name, Madison? Asked. Already half certain, there had been some kind of mistake. Octavia Sterling. Madison typed it. Or pretended to. Her fingers moved across the keyboard. But her eyes never really left the screen's faint reflection of the woman in front of her. I'm not seeing anything on Mr. Stowe's calendar for a Sterling. Are you sure it was today? Sometimes people get the buildings confused. A small, sweet, poisonous smile. There's a temp agency, 2 floors down. A lot of people come up here looking for them by mistake. Now, Octavia Sterling had a 10 o'clock with Gerald Stowe. It was on his calendar. It had been sitting on his calendar for 9 days. Confirmed twice. Blocked off for 90 full minutes. Marked with 3 stars and the single word, critical. Madison was looking right at it. We will come back to that. I'll wait. Octavia said simply, I'm a little early. Thank you. And she sat down on the leather bench by the window. Set her portfolio on her lap. Folded her hands. And waited. It was 9:47 in the morning. Here is what happened over the next 3 hours. And I want you to sit in every minute of it with me. Because this is the part nobody likes to talk about. This is not a slap. This is not a slur. This is the quiet kind of cruelty. The slow kind. And it is every bit as brutal as the loud kind. It just never leaves a mark. You can photograph at 10:05. A white man in a navy suit walked in. No appointment that anyone checked. Madison lit up like a Christmas tree. Mr. Ashby, so good to see you. Can I get you an espresso, Mr. A? Vance is just finishing a call. He'll be right out. Mr. Ashby was escorted straight back to the good conference room, the one with the skyline view, and brought a small porcelain cup of espresso on a polished silver tray. He was there 11 minutes. Octavia watched him leave with a folder under his arm and a firm handshake from a partner. She was still sitting on the bench at 10:40. A young analyst walked past, glanced at her, and said to Madison, loud enough to carry across the lobby, is somebody handling the lobby situation? A small gesture toward Octavia. The kind of gesture you make toward a delivery, toward a thing. Madison waved a hand without looking up. She says she has a meeting. She's fine. The lobby situation, that was what she was now. At 11:15, Octavia stood and walked. Calmly. To the desk. I'd like to make sure my meeting is still happening. She said. Could you let Mr. H. Stowe's assistant know that Octavia Sterling is here? She'll recognize the name. His assistant is at lunch. Madison said. It was 11:15 in the morning. I'll let her know when she's back. You can keep waiting. Or you're welcome to reschedule. Whatever's easier for you. Whatever's easier for you, as if Octavia were the inconvenience. As if Octavia were the one wasting everyone's valuable time. She went back to the bench. At 11:50. A partner walked a group of European clients across the lobby, and passing the bench, he murmured something low to the man beside him. The man chuckled and glanced back at Octavia. That same glance, the one that prices you and dismisses you in a single motion of the eyes. She heard the word probably, and she heard the word services, and she did not need to hear the rest of it. She had heard the whole sentence 1,000 times before. In 1,000 rooms, she just kept her hands folded, and her face still, and her eyes open, watching, always watching. At noon, a delivery courier came through with a tray of catering, looked at her, sitting there in her plain coat, and asked her where the service kitchen was, because he assumed, naturally, that she worked there. She told him, kindly, that she didn't know. He apologized and moved on. And somehow that one was the gentlest cut of the whole morning. Because the courier, at least, he had no idea he was doing it. The building had simply taught everyone, top to bottom, exactly what a woman who looked like her was doing in a lobby like that. And here is the thing you need to understand about Octavia Sterling. She was not confused. She was not intimidated. She was not, for one single second, wondering whether there had been a mistake. She knew precisely what was happening. She had been the lobby situation before. She had watched her own mother be the lobby situation for 20 years. She knew this floor, this marble, this exact frost-edged politeness. In her bones, she had learned, somewhere across 25 years of being the only one in the room, how to keep her face perfectly still while a fire ran underneath it. She'd had a great deal of practice. There was the trading desk where they called her the cleaning lady's kid. There was the early investor, a man named Chip. Soft hands, soft chin. A trust fund, where his judgment should have been, who sat across from her in a glass conference room when she was 31 and raising her first fund, looked at the model she had bled to build, and asked, "This is impressive. Did somebody help you put this together? Not who is your team. Did somebody help you?" As if the work in front of him could not possibly have come from the woman in front of him. She kept her face still that day too. She smiled, and thanked him for his time, and walked out, and built a $40 billion firm, without him sitting on that bench at Harrington Stowe, watching Mr. Ashby sip his espresso off a silver tray. Octavia felt the old familiar fire start up underneath her stillness. And she let it. She did not fight it. She had learned that lesson too. The fire was not the enemy. The fire was the fuel. You just never, ever let them see it move. She was not sitting there because she was helpless. She was sitting there because she was watching. She was letting Harrington Stowe Capital show her, minute by minute, in full and damning detail, exactly who they were when they believed there was nobody in the room worth impressing. And one person, exactly one person on that entire floor, actually saw her. Lorraine Davis had worked the front desk at Harrington Stowe for 31 years, until they had quietly moved her to a smaller desk down the side hall when Madison was hired, because Madison presented better for the front. Lorraine was 63 years old. She had raised 3 children and buried a husband and worked every holiday they ever asked her to work. And in 31 years, not one partner had ever once asked her to sit down at their table. But Lorraine knew her building. And around noon, she came down the hall with a cup of water and a small plate, and she set them quietly on the table beside the bench. Beside the woman in the gray coat. "You've been here a long while." "Baby," Lorraine said. Low. Just for her. "I didn't want you sitting here with nothing." Octavia looked up at her, and for the first time in 3 hours, something in her face softened. Not relief. Exactly. Recognition. 2 women who knew the exact same buildings from the exact same side of them. "Thank you," Octavia said. And then, quietly, "What's your name, Lorraine?" "Thank you. Miss Lorraine. I won't forget it." She did not know yet how much that single sentence was about to mean. It was 12:30 when the elevator opened and Thatcher Vance walked into the lobby. In the middle of a story, laughing, with 2 junior associates trailing behind him like ducklings. He was looking for Mr. Ashby's folder. He glanced around the lobby, and his eyes landed on the woman in the gray coat who had apparently been cluttering up his reception area for half the morning. And Thatcher Vance, 52 years old, 19 years, a managing partner, the man who had spent his entire career being far too smart to ever say the quiet part out loud, looked at that woman, decided he already knew the whole story, and felt the mask slip. "Ma'am, let me save you some embarrassing hours," he said, loud enough for the whole floor to hear it. You already heard the rest of what he said. The administrative assistant interviews were last week. The cleaning lady's entrance for people with your black skin is on the south side. Around, back. He crouched down to corner her. "Let's be honest about where you are in your journey. You don't belong in a platinum-level room with real money. You never will. Go back to the loading dock before I call security to drag you out of here." For 19 years, he had said somewhere else. For 19 years, he had said culture fit and the right profile and a different pace. And now, in one breath, in front of a dozen of his own people, the careful man was simply gone. And the thing that had always been living underneath him said every ugly word out loud in the open air. The receptionist giggled. The junior associates mocked. Connor Bell, a polished kid of 24, with hair like a magazine advertisement, actually laughed. A short, soft, country club laugh. And here is the part that no man like Thatcher Vance ever understands until it is far too late. There were witnesses, a dozen of them. A managing partner of Harrington Stowe Capital had just told a stranger that the entrance for people with her black skin was around back with the trash. On company property, in front of his own staff, under the oil portraits of the men who built the rules, the careful thing he had protected for 19 years, the deniability, the clean inbox, the nothing to grab. He had set the whole thing on fire in a single sentence. And he did not even feel the heat yet. It was Priya Nair who almost broke first. A young wealth advisor, 28 years old, 18 months at the firm, a mountain of student debt, and a family back home who told everyone their daughter worked on Park Avenue. She took half a step forward from the hallway, her files still pressed to her chest, and got out a single word, "Mr. Vance?" Vance did not even turn his head. "Not now. Priya," he said, light and easy, the way you would shush a child during a phone call. "I've got this handled." And Priya froze and looked at the floor and said nothing more. That is exactly how it works. That is how the temperature in a room like that gets enforced. Not with a rule, with one light, casual word that reminds everybody watching precisely what it would cost them to be the next person who spoke up. Octavia clocked it. She clocked every bit of it. She was not angry at Priya. She had been Priya once, in a different room, watching someone else get crushed and quietly doing the math on her own survival. She filed it away with everything else, down the side hall. Lorraine Davis had stopped at the corner, the cup of water still in her hand, watching the whole thing unfold with eyes that had watched this exact scene play out, in one form or another, for 31 years. And Dr. Octavia Sterling, daughter of Eunice, who had run a floor buffer across marble exactly like this at 1 a.m. for 20 years, looked up at Thatcher Vance. And she did not get angry. And she did not get loud. And she did not cry. She reached into her worn leather portfolio. "Before I go," she said, "I'd like to leave you with something." She did not pull out the document. Not yet. Vance was watching her hands, expecting what? A flyer, a complaint, a resume, in his mind. This was already over. He was simply waiting for her to gather her things and confirm it. So when she spoke, it caught him completely off guard. "Can I ask you a few questions first?" Octavia said. "Professional ones. You said it's your whole job to know who belongs in a conversation at this firm. So let's have a conversation. 2 minutes. And then I'll go. If you still want me to." Vance glanced at his audience. A dozen people now. To say no would look small. Even to him. To say yes would, he assumed, give him the pleasure of watching her embarrass herself one final time. He spread his hands. "Be my guest. Your new flagship fund?" Octavia said. "The Global Opportunities Fund. $3 billion target. You are the lead partner on it." A beat of silence. Vance's eyebrows lifted. Just slightly. How did the lobby situation know the name of his fund? That's public information. He said, "It was not. Particularly." But he recovered fast. "It is." She agreed. "So is the fact that it cannot launch without a cornerstone investor. You need an anchor commitment of at least $1 billion before the co-investors will come in behind you. Without it, the structure fails. The fund does not open. That is not an insult. Mr. Vance, that is simply how anchor-dependent launches work." Her voice was patient, almost gentle. The way a professor is patient with a room that does not yet understand it is being taught. Now, you have been chasing one specific anchor for 6 months. One single fund. Because they are the only allocator who can write the entire cornerstone in one ticket and bring the rest of the market along with them. Do you know which fund I am talking about? Vance's jaw tightened. The lobby had gone very still. Billionaire, by the hallway, had stopped breathing entirely. She had been in those meetings. She knew exactly which fund. "I am not going to discuss confidential firm business with a stranger in the lobby," Vance said. But his voice had changed. The blade was gone out of it. Something underneath it had started, very quietly, to crack. "You don't have to," Octavia said. "I'll discuss it. The fund you have been chasing is Sterling Meridian Capital. $40 billion under management. The only allocator in the market who can anchor your entire launch alone. You have sent them flowers. You have sent them a box at the opera. You have sent 3 proposals on that heavy cream paper your firm loves so much. And Gerald Stowe telephoned their founder personally and said it would be, and I am quoting your chairman now, an honor and a privilege. Dead silence. You could hear the air handler. You could hear Madison's chair creak as she slowly turned around in it. You could hear, somewhere down the hall, a telephone ringing and ringing because nobody was answering it. And here is my real question. Octavia said. She closed her portfolio and held it in both hands and looked Thatcher Vance dead in the eye. You have spent 6 months and a fortune begging Sterling Meridian to save your fund. So tell me, Mr. Vance, a man whose whole job is knowing who belongs in the room, what do you imagine the founder of Sterling Meridian Capital looks like? And Thatcher Vance, for the first time in 19 years, said absolutely nothing at all, because somewhere in the back of his very intelligent, very credentialed, very dangerous mind, a door he had kept bolted shut his entire career was beginning, slowly, to swing open. And behind that door was a thought so simple and so enormous that he could not yet make himself look at it directly. He had never looked her up. In 6 months of chasing Sterling Meridian Capital, Thatcher Vance had read the term sheets and the track record and the assets under management. He had memorized the returns, but he had never once pulled up a single photograph of the person who ran it. Why on earth would he? He already knew what a $40 billion fund manager looked like. He had known his whole life. He saw that person in the mirror every single morning. He saw that person in the gold frames on the wall. It had genuinely never occurred to him, not once, in 6 months, that the founder he was begging to save his career might be a black woman in a gray sailcoat. The possibility simply did not exist in his world. So when she walked in, he did not see a billionaire. He could not. His entire life had trained his eyes not to, "Who are you?" Vance said. It came out flat, not really a question, more like a man bracing himself for the answer. Octavia Sterling stood up. She was not a tall woman. She did not raise her voice. She simply stood, smoothed the front of her plain gray coat, and opened the worn leather portfolio one last time. "My name," she said, "is Dr. Octavia Sterling. I am the founder and chief executive of Sterling Meridian Capital." She lifted out a single sheet of cream-colored paper, heavy stock, embossed letterhead, 2 firms' logos across the top, and this is the cornerstone commitment your firm has been chasing for 6 months. $1.2 billion? The anchor that opens your fund, signed by me. This morning, in the car, on the way here, she held it up so the whole floor could see it. "I came in person," she said, "and I came dressed exactly like this. And I sat on that bench for 3 hours. Because before I hand any firm $1.2 billion of other people's money, I want to see who they truly are, not the partners in the conference room with the catered lunch. The firm, the way it treats the woman at the front desk." Her eyes flicked, just for a second, to Lorraine in the hallway. The way it treats a stranger, it has decided, is nobody at all. She let the page hang in the air between them. "You showed me exactly who you are, Mr. Vance," she said. "Thank you for being so thorough." For about 3 full seconds, nobody, on the 38th floor of Harrington Stowe Capital moved at all. Then, everything happened at once. Connor Bell, the junior associate who had laughed, went a shade of white you do not usually see on a living person, and took a small step backward, as if physical distance from Thatcher Vance might somehow save him now. Madison Earle was on her feet, both hands pressed flat against the reception desk, her mouth slightly open, watching 3 hours of her own behavior replay behind her eyes. Priya Nair let out a breath that was almost a sob and pressed her files harder against her chest. And down the hall, Lorraine Davis set her cup of water down on a side table, very slowly, and brought one hand up to cover her mouth. Thatcher Vance stood frozen in the dead center of the marble lobby, staring at the cream-colored page in Octavia Sterling's hand. And you could watch, in real time, the entire architecture of his life come apart behind his eyes. He understood now. All of it. At once. The 3 hours. The service entrance. The temp agency. The cleaning lady's entrance for people with her black skin. He had taken the single most important investor in the firm's history, the woman whose signature his whole career depended on, the cornerstone of the fund that was supposed to get his name carved into the marble. And he had told her, in front of a dozen witnesses, to go around back with the trash. Dr. Sterling. He started. His voice had lost every bit of its warm authority. It came out thin. There's clearly been a terrible misunderstanding. I had no idea. If you'll just let me. There is no misunderstanding. Octavia said quietly, that is what I keep trying to tell you. You understood me perfectly. You just had me wrong. And that was the exact moment the elevator opened. Gerald Stowe stepped out, 71 years old, silver-haired, the last living heir of the founding family. The chairman, whose great-grandfather's portrait was hanging 6 feet away on the wall. He was mid-sentence with his assistant, holding a leather folder. Looking for the visitor his calendar had blocked off 3 weeks ago. The meeting marked, critical, the most important 10 o'clock of his entire year. The one he had assumed, when his guest had not been brought back to him, had simply gotten stuck in traffic. I'm so sorry. Dr. Sterling must be running late. Can someone check whether... And then Gerald Stowe stopped cold, because he saw her, standing in the middle of the lobby, holding the signed commitment in her hand, with Thatcher Vance white-faced beside her, and a dozen of his staff frozen around them like figures in a painting, and Gerald Stowe, who had run this firm for 30 years, who had shaken hands with 3 presidents, who had never in his life lost his composure in public, looked at the scene in front of him and understood it instantly and completely. Octavia. He breathed. He crossed the lobby fast, his hand outstretched, his face a mask of pure horror. Octavia, I have been waiting for you upstairs since 10 o'clock. Why on earth are you down here? Who? And his eyes went to Madison, to the associates, to Vance, and his voice dropped into something cold and lethal that nobody in that lobby had ever heard from him before. Why is Dr. Sterling standing in my lobby in her coat? How long has she been here? Nobody answered. How long? 3 hours. Octavia said, Calm. I arrived at 9:45. Your reception desk told me you did not know me, and that there was a temp agency 2 floors down. Your managing partner told me the entrance for people with my black skin was around back say, with the loading dock. He offered to call security to drag me out. And he said it in front of every person standing in this room. Gerald Stowe turned, very slowly, and looked at Thatcher Vance. I want you to picture that look. Picture 71 years of inherited authority. 114 years of a family name, turning its full and terrible weight onto one single man in the middle of a marble floor, with a dozen people watching. Vance opened his mouth. Nothing came out of it. Gerald, Octavia said, I do not want you angry at the woman at the desk, or at the kids who didn't know what to do. They were just following the temperature of the room. Somebody set that temperature a long time before today. She looked at Vance, and he set it on purpose. Every single day, for 19 years. The only difference is that today he finally said it out loud, where you could all hear it. Then she did something that nobody in that room expected. She handed Gerald Stowe the cream-colored page. For one instant, Gerald Stowe's face flooded with relief. The cornerstone, the fund, the signature, it was real. It was signed. It was right here in his hand. Maybe, somehow, this could still be saved. And then Octavia Sterling reached out, took the top corner of the page between 2 fingers, and tore it cleanly in half. Once, right down the middle. The sound of that paper tearing was the single loudest thing in that enormous marble room. That was the only copy that was leaving this building today, she said, letting the 2 halves drift down onto the marble table between them. Sterling Meridian is withdrawing from the Global Opportunities Fund. Effective immediately. You can tell your co-investors the cornerstone is gone. For a long moment, Thatcher Vance just stared at the 2 torn halves of the page lying on the marble. Then something in him buckled. The 19 years of authority. The warm condescension. The, I can tell within 30 seconds whether someone belongs. All of it drained out of his face at once. And what was left underneath was just fear. Naked, expensive fear. Dr. Sterling, please. He actually took a step toward her, his hands lifting, palms out. Please. I made a mistake. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. And I will do anything to make it right. The fund, the firm, my career, there are people who depend on me. There are families. It is always families, and people who depend on you when the bill finally comes due, Octavia said. Her voice never rose. Funny how it was never about any of that 3 hours ago. When you decided I belonged at the loading dock, you were not worried about anybody's family when you said the word about my black skin in front of this entire room. She let that sit in the air. You want to make it right. I believe you want to make this right. This, today, the part that is finally costing you something. But you have had 1,000 Tuesdays. Mr. Vance, 1,000 chances to make it right, with 1,000 people who could not tear up $1 billion to make you feel it. The analyst you called a great team player, the couple you walked over to the children's table, the young man who just wasn't a culture fit. Where were your open hands then? Out. Like this. Or closing the door. Vance had no answer. There is no answer. He knew it. And so did every single person watching. Gerald Stowe stepped between them. He looked at Thatcher Vance. The way you look at a stranger you have just discovered has been living in your house, wearing your name. Don't say another word to her, the chairman said. Quietly. You have said enough words in this building to last 100 years. Go to your office. Don't touch the phones. We will talk in the morning. He did not shout it. He did not have to. Some sentences carry their own weight. And that one landed on Thatcher Vance like a building coming down on top of him. Octavia picked up her worn portfolio. She nodded once to Gerald Stowe. Not warm. Not cold. Just finished. Then she turned to leave. And on her way to the glass doors, she stopped. Just for a second. At the side hall where Lorraine Davis stood, with her hand still pressed over her mouth. Thank you, Miss Lorraine, Octavia said softly. I told you I wouldn't forget. And she walked out the front door. The front, past the bench, past the portraits, underneath the Latin that promised fortune to the worthy, out into the cold Manhattan afternoon, and just like that, with one quiet motion of her hand, Dr. Octavia Sterling pulled $1.2 billion straight out of Harrington Stowe Capital and pulled the floor out from under the most important fund in the firm's history. Now here is what most people do not understand about money at that level. It does not move with shouting. It does not move with lawsuits. At least not at first. It moves the way a glacier moves. Slow, silent, and absolutely unstoppable. And by the time you finally hear it cracking, it is already far too late to get out of the way. Octavia Sterling did not have to raise her voice to end Thatcher Vance. She just had to remove her signature. The rest of it happened all on its own. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Gerald Stowe was on the phone in his office, with the door closed, calling the 3 largest co-investors in the Global Opportunities Fund, the ones who had only committed because Sterling Meridian was the anchor. He had to tell each of them, in his own voice, that the cornerstone had withdrawn. He did not tell them why. He did not have to. In that world, the why travels faster than any phone call ever could. By 4 o'clock, 2 of the 3 co-investors had pulled their commitments entirely. The third was reconsidering, which in that language means the exact same thing, just more politely. The Global Opportunities Fund. $3 billion. 6 months of work. The launch that was supposed to carve Thatcher Vance's name into the marble forever was dead before it ever opened. The single most expensive failure in the entire history of the firm. But it did not stop there. It never stops there. By the end of the week, the story had leaked, and it leaked in the worst possible way, because it was true, and because there were a dozen witnesses to it. The words he said in that lobby, the cleaning lady's entrance, the loading dock, the threat to drag her out, those words did not stay in the lobby. A managing partner of one of the oldest firms on Parity had said them out loud, in front of his own staff, to the most powerful black allocator in the country. In that world, a firm whose top partner could look at a $40 billion fund manager and see a cleaning lady, and then say, so, was a firm whose judgment could no longer be trusted with anyone's money at all. Clients started asking quiet questions. 2 family offices paused their relationships to review their allocations. A pension board that had been about to expand its mandate suddenly went silent. None of them ever said the real reason out loud. They did not have to. Octavia had not had to either. There was a partners' meeting that Friday. Gerald Stowe ran it himself. standing, which he never did. The story among the people who were in that room is that he spoke for less than 4 minutes, and that nobody breathed for any of them. He told them what had happened in the lobby. He told them the cornerstone was gone and the fund was dead. And then, the way the story goes, he stopped and looked around the long table at the portraits of his great-grandfather and Cornelia Stowe on the wall. And he said something close to this. For 114 years, we have called ourselves a firm that backs the worthy. This week, the single most worthy investor in America walked through our front door, and the best people in this room left her on a bench for 3 hours and then pointed her at the loading dock. So I do not want to hear one more word in this building about who is and is not our kind of client. That standard just cost us $1.2 billion. And our name, we are going to find out now. Every one of us. Whether we actually believe the thing we carved over that door, or whether we just liked the way it sounded. Then he sat down, and the meeting was over, and there was Madison, sweet, frost-edged Madison, at the front desk, who could price a human being in 2 seconds flat. She was not fired. Not right away. Not officially. But something in her broke that Tuesday, and never quite set straight again. People said she went very quiet at the desk after that. That she started, of all things, standing up when visitors came in. That she said, "Good morning. Welcome to Harrington Stowe, to everyone now. The ones in the diamonds, and the ones in the plain coats. Exactly the same. Every single time." As if saying it enough might somehow reach back through time and undo 3 hours she would never, ever be allowed to take back. Some lessons you only learn once, but you do learn them. And Thatcher Vance, the morning after, he was called into Gerald Stowe's office. The same office where, for 19 years, Vance had quietly imagined himself one day, sitting. He was in there for 11 minutes. The same 11 minutes, almost to the second, that Mr. Ashby had spent being fawned over in the good conference room while Octavia sat alone on the bench. There is a kind of justice in that nobody planned, and everybody felt he did not come out a managing partner. The firm's statement, weeks later, used the cleanest possible language, the same kind of clean, deniable language Vance himself had spent a whole career perfecting. Mr. Vance has decided to step away from the firm to pursue other opportunities. We thank him for his years of service. No mention of Octavia. No mention of 3 hours. No mention of a cleaning lady's entrance. Just a man, quietly, walking out the front door. He had spent his entire life guarding against everyone else who looked like her. But the people in that lobby knew. Madison knew. Connor Bell knew. Priya Nair knew. Lorraine Davis knew. And so, eventually, did the whole industry. Because in that world, the real reasons always find their way into the room, even when the press release leaves them out. For 19 years, Thatcher Vance had been too smart to ever say the word. He did not lose his career because he was loud. He lost it because, for one single morning, the arrogance got bigger than the caution, and he finally said out loud what he had spent 2 decades carefully hiding to the one person in America who could make him pay the full price for it now. Here is where a lot of these stories would simply end. The bad man loses everything. The credits roll. You feel good for an afternoon. But Octavia Sterling did not come up out of Brownsville, did not sit in midnight lobbies doing algebra while her mother ran a floor buffer, did not build $40 billion, 2 desks at a time, just to take down one managing partner on a Tuesday. Ending one man's career is not justice. It is barely even satisfying. One man falls, and the marble lobby simply fills his chair with the next man who looks just like him and learned all the same clean words. The door stays locked. The portraits stay on the wall. Nothing actually changes. Octavia knew that better than anyone alive. She had spent her whole life watching individual battles get won while the war stayed exactly the same. So she did not stop with Thatcher Vance. That $1.2 billion, the cornerstone she tore in half on a marble table, did not disappear. Money like that does not vanish. It moves, and Octavia moved it on purpose, in a direction designed to outlast every single person who had made her wait 3 hours in a coat. She took that capital, and over the following year, she built something she called the Eunice Fund, named, though almost no one in finance ever understood the reference, after her mother, Eunice Sterling, night shift cleaner, the woman who entered the towers around back. The Eunice Fund did one thing, and it did it relentlessly. It anchored other people. It became the cornerstone investor for fund managers the rest of Wall Street had looked at and decided were not the right fit, the right profile, the right pedigree. Black founders, women, the kids who had been told, warmly, to go try a firm more appropriate for where they were in their journey. The very first cornerstone commitment the Eunice Fund ever made went to a young portfolio manager named Deshaun Carter. You might remember the name. He was the perfect grade point average from Howard. The 2 internships at the Federal Reserve, the analyst Thatcher Vance had passed over years ago because he just wasn't a culture fit. Deshaun had eventually left finance entirely. Exhausted after a decade of rooms that made him feel like the lobby situation, Octavia found him teaching high school math in Newark. When she walked into his 3rd period algebra class on a Tuesday and told him she wanted to anchor a fund he did not even have yet, he did not believe her at first. He assumed it was a prank, or a mistake, or that she had the wrong Deshaun. He told her, politely, that he had given finance 11 years, and it had given him back a decade of being the smartest, most prepared, most invisible man in every room he ever walked into, and that he was happier now teaching kids who actually looked glad to see him. Octavia listened to all of it. Then she said one thing. "Mr. Carter, I read about that deal you closed. The $9 million one. I read the whole structure. It was elegant. It was better than anything that desk had done in 5 years. And a man named Thatcher Vance stood up at a dinner and gave the credit for it to a kid who sat silent in the corner. You did not fail at finance. Finance failed at you. There is a difference. And you have spent 11 years confusing the two. Come build the fund. I will write the first check before you finish your coffee. And the next time some Vance looks at one of your analysts and calls him a great team player who is really coming along, you will be the one holding the capital, and he will be the one waiting in the lobby." Deshaun Carter went home that night and could not sleep. He started the fund. The Eunice Fund wrote the cornerstone, 9 figures, the largest first check most people in that world had ever seen go to a manager who looked like him. Within 3 years, It was one of the top-performing funds in its category. And Deshawn had hired 4 young analysts. The rest of the street had passed over for fit. One of them had a perfect grade point average from a school nobody on Park Avenue respected, and a mother who cleaned hotel rooms downtown. Deshawn gave her the exact same line Octavia gave him. The one Eunice gave her daughter in a midnight lobby half a century ago. Keep your numbers right. They do not care who is holding the pencil. The thing about that one sentence is that it travels. It is the only inheritance some families ever have, and it compounds far better than money ever could. And Octavia did not forget Miss Lorraine. About a month after that Tuesday, a letter arrived at the small side hall desk where Harrington Stowe had quietly parked Lorraine Davis because Madison presented better for the front. It was an offer from Sterling Meridian Capital, not for a reception job, for a position Octavia had created, specifically Director of Client Dignity and Office Culture. A real role, a real salary. The kind of salary that changes a family for 3 generations, with an actual office and an actual door. Octavia's reasoning was simple, and she put it in plain words right there in the letter. In 31 years, you were the only person in that building who saw me. I never want to run a firm where the person at the front desk is the only one with that gift. I want you to teach my whole company how to do what you did without even thinking about it. You will be very good at it. You already are. Lorraine Davis, 63 years old, who had worked every holiday they ever asked her to, and never once been invited to sit at the table. Read that letter at her small side hall desk, and cried for 10 full minutes before she could pick up the phone to say yes. And then Octavia did the one thing that actually scared the whole industry. She wrote it all down. Not the story, not the names, but the system, how the gatekeeping actually works, how the clean words hide the dirty decisions, how fit and pedigree and the right profile are just the modern coat that an old, ugly thing puts on to walk through the lobby, unbothered. She built it into a hiring and client standard, and she called it the Sterling Standard, and she made it a hard condition of the Eunice Fund's money. Any firm that wanted that anchor capital had to adopt it. Blind first-round screening, a documented reason for every single pass. A real, named path forward. For the people the industry had spent a century pointing toward the door, dozens of firms adopted it. Not because they suddenly grew a conscience overnight. They adopted it because Octavia Sterling controlled capital they could not afford to lose. And she had made dignity a term of the deal. She did to them exactly what they had always done to everyone else. She set the price of admission. She just changed who got to walk through the front. And that is the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge ends a man. Justice changes the building. There is one more thing I want to give you. And then we are done. It did not happen in a lobby or a boardroom. There were no witnesses to it. And it is the only part of this whole story that Octavia Sterling has never told to anyone. So I am telling you, the version her people pieced together later, the version that is true, even if the small details are not exact. Because some truths do not need the details to be exact. The evening after that Tuesday, after the signature, after the 3 hours, after she tore $1.2 billion in half on a marble table and walked out into the cold, Octavia Sterling did not go to a celebration. There was no champagne, No team gathered to toast the takedown. Her people offered. She said no. She went to a cemetery in Brooklyn. She drove herself down. She still drove herself. After all those years, the same way she still carried the same worn portfolio, she parked, and she walked across the wet grass in her plain gray coat to a modest headstone near the back. The kind of plot a night shift cleaner could afford on a night shift cleaner's wages, and she sat down on the cold ground beside it. The same way she used to sit beside her mother in those empty marble lobbies at midnight. The stone read, Eunice Sterling, and underneath it, the dates, and underneath that, 4 words Octavia had chosen herself. She kept her numbers right. She took the laminated badge out of her portfolio, her mother's night shift cleaning badge. Soft at the corners now. The photograph faded. Eunice, in her gray uniform. Not smiling. The way you do not smile in the picture they take of you, for the building you are not allowed to enter through the front. The same building, the same marble, the same Park Avenue. The badge that got Eunice in around back. Every night. For 20 years. So that her daughter could do her algebra under the lights they left burning all night for no one. And Octavia Sterling. The doctor. The founder. The billionaire. One of the most powerful allocators of capital in the entire country. Sat on the wet grass beside her mother's grave and held that faded badge in both hands. And finally let herself feel the full weight of the whole day. Mama, she said, out loud, to the stone and the cold, and to no one. They made me wait 3 hours today, in a building just like yours. Her voice broke. Just a little. Same marble. I could have told you the brand of the floor wax from the smell of it, and one of them told me to go around back, with the trash. For people with my black skin, he said it just like that. Mama? Right out loud. In front of everybody. She laughed. A small, vet, broken laugh. And then I signed a piece of paper, worth more than that whole entire building. And I tore it up. And I walked out the front. The front? Mama? They held the door for me. She pressed the badge to her chest. You always told me they would look at me and think they already knew the whole story. You were right. They never once changed their minds about me. Not in 3 hours. Not until they had no choice left. But I changed the building. Mama, I changed who gets to come in the front. And I put your name on the door of the thing that is going to keep changing it. Long after I'm gone, she sat there a long time. The light went down over Brooklyn. And somewhere across the river, the towers came on. All those windows lit for no one. All those marble lobbies, empty and gleaming. All those floors that somebody, right now, tonight, was running a buffer across at the start of another long night shift. She did not understand. At 9 years old in those lobbies, why her mother kept telling her to keep her numbers right. She understood it now. The numbers were the one thing they could not take, could not argue with, could not redirect around back. The numbers were the key that finally opened the front door for here. And now, because of the badge in her hand and the name on the fund, for the next little girl doing algebra in a lobby at midnight while her mother mops the floor, they finally saw me. Mama, she whispered. They finally saw me. Some moments do not need anybody else in the room. That was one of them. So here is where we land. Thatcher Vance was a careful man for 19 years. he gave to charity. He had marched somewhere. He had a framed photo with a black senator on his wall, and a clean inbox, and a completely clear conscience, and on one single Tuesday, the certainty that a black woman in a plain coat was nobody got so big inside him that the careful man simply vanished. And the thing underneath said every ugly word out loud to the one person who could make him pay for all of it. That is the thing this story is really about. The loud racism in the lobby is not even the most dangerous part. The most dangerous part is the 19 quiet years before it. The clean words, the warm smile that closes the door, the culture fit, the right profile, the let's be honest about where you are in your journey, the part you could play back for a lawyer, and the lawyer would shrug. The loud sentence got Thatcher Vance fired, but it was the quiet years that did the real damage. To 100 people who never got to tear up $1 billion to make anyone feel it. And the only thing that has ever beaten any of it, loud or quiet, is exactly what Eunice Sterling told her 9-year-old daughter in an empty lobby at 1 a.m. They are going to look at you and decide they already know the whole story. Let them. You keep your numbers right. Numbers do not lie. And they do not care who is holding the pencil. Octavia Sterling kept her numbers right for 40 years. And when the man in the marble lobby finally underestimated the wrong woman, those numbers were the key that opened the front door. And then she used that key to prop the door wide open behind her. So, the next one would not have to wait 3 hours in a coat just to be seen. So, measure a person by how they treat the people they think can do absolutely nothing for them. Watch how a man treats the woman at the front desk, the stranger in the plain coat, the kid he has already decided isn't a culture fit. That tells you everything his clean words are built to hide. Honestly, this one got to me while I was putting it together. A woman who sat in marble lobbies as a little girl doing homework while her mama mopped the floor, who built $40 billion out of 11,000, and a model she wrote on her own time, and they still looked at her and saw the help. 3 hours on a bench. Whatever's easier for you. Around back. That is the part that stays with me. But she did not get loud. And she did not get bitter. She kept her numbers right. She let them show her exactly who they were. And then she changed the whole building and put her mother's name on it. So, if this story moved you, if you have ever been the person on the bench, the stranger in the coat, the one handed a list of places more appropriate for where you are, I want you to do something for me. Tell me about it down in the comments. When was the last time someone took one look at you and decided they already knew your whole story? What did you do? Did you get to show them yet? Or are you still keeping your numbers right and waiting on your Tuesday? I read every single comment on this channel. And the stories you tell down there are the entire reason I make these. And if you know somebody who needs to hear this today, somebody sitting on their own bench right now, in their own marble lobby, being told to go around back, share this with them. Sometimes, just knowing that somebody else walked through that same door and came out the front is enough to keep a person going. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories like this one. Tap the like button so more people who need to hear it can find it. And remember the one thing Eunice Sterling knew, that Thatcher Vance never once figured out in all his 19 careful years. Fortune does not favor the worthy. Fortune favors the ones who keep their numbers right. No matter who is holding the pencil, and no matter who is watching them do it. I'll see you in the next one.